The Joy of Motherhood by Buchi Emecheta. Chapter 5. A failed woman. Waka was returning home from working all night on the ship that docked along the marina in Lagos. He was a Nneego of medium height and slight build, and though it was difficult to determine his age from looking at him, with the knowledge that he had been a docker for 10 years, one could have guessed that he was between its mid-30s and the age of 40. He was now noticeably tired. His eyes were bloodshot, his feet heavy. But he had one consolation. He was going home to catch up with some sleep before the evening shift. He did not wish to look beyond his quiet rest and cooling bath. With such sweet thoughts in its mind, he climbed onto his rickety bicycle, black with age, and faced the formidable task of setting it to work its way up the hill to Joy of Motherhood, where he lived with his sad-eyed wife. He labored painfully from the island to the mainland. The weather was damp, and so dewy, that all shapes seemed indistinct. Even the graceful palm trees and coconut palms that guarded the shores of Lagos like faithful sentries were vague this morning. Looking across the lagoon, Waka could see mist rising from the bluey waters and melting into the moving clouds. To think that in a few hours this very place would be steaming from direct heat. By the time he got home, in any case, his wife Ato would be ready to go to her fish stall in Nneego market. It was not that he wished to avoid her, it was just that he was not in any mood to listen to her inconsequential prattling. The Lagos Bridge was restricted on both sides by intricate iron uprights, painted red and with spear-shaped points, and a narrow tarred road wound itself between these fence-like ironworks. Near Tabalogan, it was necessary for Waka to cycle from the wider road to the narrow part of the bridge joining the island to the mainland. Still full of thoughts of his bed, and puffing away ominously at the same time, he was jolted into the present by angry shouts and screams. "If you wish to die, why do you want me to be your killer, eh?" Waka looked up to see a Kaya bus swerving dangerously to his left, in order to avoid hitting him. As usual at that time in the morning, the ordinary buses were almost impossible to get, so all varieties of private vehicles cashed in on the high demand. They were dubbed with the name Kaya bus, meaning literally quick bus, for the advantage of this kind of transport was that once loaded it would never stop until it reached the island, and several trips could be made each morning, while the bus owned by the white man's company would go from stop to stop, slogging slowly like a duck up and down the Lagos Bridge. The quicker the owners of these mini-buses went, the more money they would collect, for clerks and messengers working on the island preferred to go by them, even though a full Kaya bus meant 6 to 10 passengers hanging on at each window, another dozen or so by the door, some even clinging to the roof. It was one of these buses that was now almost knocking Waka down. The shouting driver, like Waka, was sweating in the morning mist. This minibus seemed to be exceptionally tightly packed, and, looking at the driver, one could not be blamed for thinking that it was his own physical energy that was propelling the vehicle along, and not the power produced by any kind of petrol. The man was gasping breathlessly. He had swerved so dramatically that some of the passengers hanging outside the bus had to jump down to save themselves from injury. There were screams and the squeaking of brakes. Waka realized that he had had a narrow escape from death. Instinctively, like the precariously hanging passengers, his feet sought solid ground. He stood there breathless and confused. He looked about him wildly, while his mind began to register the extent of the danger he had been in a minute before. "Well," thundered the driver, looking offended and demanding an apology. He shook an angry fist in the air at the same time. "If you don't know what to say, At least take your ancient bundle of old yarn off the road. I still want to make use of my life. Next time you are looking for a killer, please, in the name of Allah, take yourself somewhere else. Please move out of my way." Nweka, who was too shocked to protest, did as he was told, picking up his ancient bike from where it had fallen, twisted but still workable, and his shriveled and shaky self with it. "I am sorry," he said, ignoring the laughing passengers who by now had recovered from their shock and were cheering the driver's uncouth language. Nweka would have replied in like manner, but he was too shaken to want to play the game of abuse. Moreover, his Yoruba was not good enough. He would lose such a contest. So he decided to be apologetic, seeing that it was all his fault. And he was tired. The driver saw this, and stopped his verbal fight. "I am sorry, driver, I have been working all night, and my mind is still asleep, believe me." The driver smiled widely at this. It was not every morning that drivers were treated politely, and in fact one of the tools of their trade was their ability to reduce anybody to tears with pointed tongue. Still, he would not deny his passengers the joy of seeing him win once more. "The life is yours, man. But next time you're tired of it, stay out of the road, and out of my way. You can strangle yourself in your room. It's less spectacular, but at least wouldn't put an innocent man in trouble." With that, he careered round a sharp corner, roaring his bus and its loud-mouthed passengers towards the island. Nweka, judging from the way his legs still shook, knew it would be better to walk, even though he could have manipulated the bicycle back into action. Only the front wheel was a little bent, and he could have straightened that out had he the inclination. People who did not know what had happened passed him, and wondered whether he was mad to be simply rolling his cycle along the sidewalk, taking up so much space, when he could be riding it, arriving at his destination sooner, and saving himself the effort of having to say sorry to everyone he collided with. It was getting busy on the pavements siding Carter Bridge at this time of the morning. He knew that people tended to prejudge others without knowing the reasons for their unorthodox behavior, but he did not have the time to go about justifying his actions. As long as he did not hurt anybody, and he arrived home safely, he did not much care what other people were thinking. As the sun came out, it infused a kind of energy into Nweka's exhausted body. He even began to accept that being alive on a day like this was a privilege, and he told himself to start enjoying it. He was like someone who had a valuable gift, and who for a long time had not appreciated its value. It was only when the gift was about to be taken away from him that he realized what he had been taking for granted. He became appreciative, but it was a private appreciation. If he were to stop any of these hurrying people and tell them of it, they would think that he had suddenly taken leave of his senses. Indeed, he did not appear all that sane, in his dirty work clothes, wheeling an antiquated machine, and smiling benignly at vacancy. He was debating with himself whether it was not about time he remounted, when he saw a crowd on the other side of the bridge. It was a group of early workers, market women and labourers on their way to the Abutiro market, all babbling in a kind of excitement. Their voices were tense and feverish, tinged with awe, like those of people watching a human sacrifice, he thought. Not that he had ever seen such a sacrifice, but he had heard of people who had witnessed such an uncommon sight. They were all talking nervously, yet they stood away from a person whom Nweka could not make out. Was it a man or a woman? He peered in between the traffic and deduced that the person looked more like a woman. She was not old. In fact, judging from her straight back and agile body, she must be rather young. But she was behaving in a curious way, almost as if she was doing some sort of acrobatic dance. Waka wanted to look at close quarters. He blasted the unceasing traffic, but his eyes never left the scene. He was extra careful after the shock he had earlier, not wishing to be knocked down, just because he was going to look at a woman who was either mad, or doing some kind of juju dance for her god. He was going to take his time. One shouldn't be near death twice on the same morning. His impatience was far from diminished as he saw from where he stood what the woman was actually trying to do. She was trying to jump into the lagoon. Good Lord, Waka thought, look at me jubilant for being given another opportunity to live longer, and see this foolish woman eager to end her own life, when her maker is not yet ready for her. How uneven the whole business of living is. Oh, blast this traffic. One would have thought that the unending business was being staged to tantalize him. Soon there was a little gap, and he ran, bicycle and all, across the road. As he approached the other side, there was a roar from the crowd as the woman floored a man who was trying to wrestle with her and free her from the railings which she was climbing, in order to facilitate her leap to death. To be floored by an opponent in wrestling meant defeat, but to be laid flat by a woman was more than a defeat, it was a humiliation. The crowd, while eager to be at their places of work, appreciated this free entertainment, though none of them wanted the woman to achieve her suicidal aim. Not when they were there anyway. No one wanted to start the day with such an incident on their conscience. Another man tore himself from the crowd in an attempt to save her, but though the woman did not floor this one, she fought fiercely and expertly, so that both of them were panting, and the fear of everybody was that the man might give in and say, after all, it's her life. However, a thing like that is not permitted in Nigeria. You are simply not allowed to commit suicide in peace, because everyone is responsible for the other person. Foreigners may call us a nation of busybodies, but to us, an individual's life belongs to the community, and not just to him or her. So a person has no right to take it while another member of the community looks on. He must interfere, he must stop it happening. It was while watching the fight, and the way she was warding off her opponent, that Waka realized that this woman whose face was still hidden from him was not a Yoruba woman. She was from his village, where women were taught to wrestle like men, to learn the art of self-defense. She turned her face in the struggle, and Waka saw Nneego, unbelievable though it was. It took him less than a second to pinch himself and rub his hands over his face to convince himself that he was not dreaming. As if he needed a double reassurance, he shouted hoarsely, Nneego! Nneego, the child of Agbadi's love. Nneego! What are you doing? What are you trying to do? She stopped abruptly in her fight. She looked up at the bystanders, her eyes roaming over their heads, and not on their faces. She was shocked. Someone in this crowd knew who she was. She had bargained on the fact that Lagos was such a big place, with people of so many different races and backgrounds, that it was very unlikely that anyone would know her. She had known she would probably be opposed by some pedestrians on the bridge, but she had calculated that she would arrive there before it got too busy. She was wrong. Though it was still misty, and a little dampness lingered from the night before, yet the morning had a dazzling brightness from the young sun which drew people from their sleeping places and onto the open road. Nneego's hesitation gave Waka the chance he needed. He had not made a mistake. It was Naif's wife, all right. Acting instinctively, he threw his cherished antiquated machine to one side, where it crashed with a pathetic jangle of old pieces of rusty metal. Like an agile cat, pouncing on an unsuspecting mouse, he rolled himself almost into a round shape and leapt towards Nneego. They both fell on the cemented ground. Waka's grazed knee started to bleed immediately. Nneego got up quickly, trying to tear herself away like a lunatic, but now there were more people willing to help Waka. The first man who had tried unsuccessfully to restrain her undaunted came forward again and held her tightly by the wrist. Waka, breathing heavily, gasped Nneego. "What are you trying to do to your husband, your father, your people and your son who is only a few weeks old? You want to kill yourself. Who is going to look after your baby for you? You are shaming your womanhood, shaming your motherhood." For the first time since Nneego had seen her child there on the mat, tears of shock and frustration flowed down her cheeks. Who was going to give her the energy to tell the world that she had once been a mother but had failed? How would people understand that she had wanted so desperately to be a woman like everybody else, but had now failed again? Oh, God, I wish these people, though they mean well, had simply let me be. Her heart was pounding in pain, and bitterness welled from the same heart into her mouth. She tried several times to talk, but her voice produced no sound. She could only shake her head negatively at Waka's angry tirade, trying to tell him that he was wrong. Another Ribo woman, carrying a large basket of yams on her way to the market, was not satisfied with Waka's verbal chastisement. She stepped forward and slapped Nneego on one side of her face, adding, "You mean you have a baby at home, yet you come here disgracing the man who paid for you to be brought into this town. I don't know what our people are becoming. As soon as they step near the coast they think they own themselves, and forget the tradition of our fathers." So angry was this woman that she had put all her energy into the slap, and its sting went home, momentarily blinding Nneego. Then Nneego cried, put so much force into the use of her voice that the sound broke through, and it sounded roughly like that of a man. "But I'm not a woman anymore. I am not a mother anymore. The child is there, dead on the mat. My Kai has taken him away from me. I only want to go in there and meet her." It was then that people understood the reason for her irrational behavior. Even some of the men had tears of pity in their eyes. Pieces of advice and consolation poured from people she had never seen before and would never see again. Many took the time to tell her their own stories. Even the woman who had slapped her told her that out of 6 pregnancies she only had 2 children alive, yet she was still living. She reminded Nneego that she was still very young, and said that once babies started coming, they came in great numbers. "She's not mad after all," the woman took it upon herself to inform the crowd in her imperfect Yoruba. "She has only just lost the child that told the world that she's not barren." And they all agreed that a woman without a child for her husband was a failed woman. It was left to Waka, who had saved a life, to lead Nneego home safely to her husband Naif. Chapter 6. A man is never ugly. Celia, the cook's wife, was warming a bowl of corn porridge breakfast for her 2 young children. There was enough of it for her husband Yabani too, who, though he did all manner of fries and bakes for the meals, did not like English food. He said it made him feel queasy, somehow. So despite the sweet smell emanating from the main kitchen, Yabani would sneak a few minutes to come to their room for some hot African pap. Cordelia was hurrying to satisfy her hungry children and make sure that Yabani's share was left at the ready. She was not too preoccupied, however, to notice that she had not seen Nneego all morning. They were the same age, and they were neighbors, and although like all good neighbors they might occasionally be jealous of each other's possessions or pass gratuitous remarks about one another, yet their basic friendliness remained unchanged. The two families shared the same veranda, which was attached to their rooms and opened into Dr. Mears' backyard. This small outer building where they lived was typical of the accommodation provided for African servants, which the white masters always referred to as the boys' quarters. Though they belonged to different parts of Iboland, Naif came from the west and Yabani and Cordelia from the east. The fact that they spoke the same language and had the same cultural background cemented the intimacy of the cook and washerman. When the women quarreled, their husbands would take sides, but eventually common sense would prevail, and they decided that it was not worth excommunicating each other. There was far more to be gained by communication. If the tongue and the mouth quarrel, they invariably make it up, because they have to stay in the same head. So although Nneego and Cordelia might have their arguments, the men never allowed them to go too deep. In fact, the truth of it was that, while the women bickered and gossiped about each other, the men usually patched things up on paydays, declaring their loyalties and drowning any differences in palm wine. On the whole, the two couples coexisted well. They went into each other's rooms without formal invitation. They joined naturally in one another's conversation, and in general lived together like members of one large family. Cordelia saw as she made her many trips to and from the kitchen that her friend's door was ajar. Nneego could not have gone to buy cigarettes so early, and anyway she never went without saying anything. Cordelia did not recall having heard Ngozi this morning either. He was growing to be a very demanding baby, and his morning cries were unmistakable. But Nneego could not be far away, since she had left her door open. Cordelia made a mental note to look in later, when her own demanding BABIES degrees needs had been met. In her haste, thoughts about her friend were temporarily pushed to the back of her mind. Soon the children were busy lapping their pup-like kittens, and Cordelia made a last journey to the kitchen for BANI degrees share. Since he was not in yet, she felt justified in leaving his bowl by Nneego's door while she checked inside. She carefully placed the hot bowl on the floor, and, without straightening her back, peeped into the room. Nneego, where the goodness are you? And look, leaving your baby asleep on the mat. Suddenly she felt a kind of chill. Something was not quite right here. Why was the child lying like that? Why did he look so stiff, and his legs so lifeless? She called her friend again, now in a low voice, purring like a cat, but Nneego was not there. As she progressed softly into the room, Cordelia sensed that all was far from well. She felt herself pulled into the middle of the room, and, still stooping as though in involuntary prayer, she peered into the face of the baby. "You are dead," she said in a whisper. "Mari, Mother of God, you are dead. Ngozi, you are gone." She crossed herself. She and Yabani were devout members of the Catholic Church and lived by its laws. She walked back stealthily, as if she had killed the child herself, and, by the door, she let out a scream. "Nneego, where are you? Your beautiful baby is gone." She shouted this twice, and then she covered her mouth, not wanting to overreact, as her children came up to her wanting to know what the trouble was. Her whole body shook like one convulsed. Still she managed to shepherd her children away from Nneego's room. In her haste, she upset the prop she had left by the door. The heat of it burned her bare feet and she did not have time to nurse them. One of her children pointed out that she had upset their father's breakfast, but she ignored the child and led them to another part of the compound to play. Her first thought was to run to Naif and tell him, and then to her husband. But where was Nneego? She wondered again as she made her way to the white man's quarters. Then she stopped short, for right there in front of her, just a few feet away from where she stood on the wet grass, was Naif, stooping in his work, his concentration so deep that the song he was whistling was completely tuneless. It would be like a sacrilege to disturb such complete and personal bliss. No, she would go and tell her own husband first. He would know how to break the sad news to Naif. But to still her pounding heart and answer him calmly when he greeted her, as she knew he would, was going to be a difficult task. She breathed very deeply, her hands clutched in front of her, as if in prayer, her eyes averted, and she blurted out, to prevent him speaking first. "It looks as if it's going to be a clear morning. Hello, good wife, did you sleep well? You miss your husband already?" He laughed. But he left you only about an hour ago." "I know. He has taken some of my housekeeping money," Cordelia lied, forcing herself to make a sound that was meant to be laughter, but which sounded croaky even to her own ears. Naif wondered to himself what the matter was. Cordelia did not sound her usual cheerful self. Aloud he said, "Go on, and don't keep him off his job for too long. You don't want our employers complaining, do you, good wife?" Cordelia felt sorry for Naif. He was such an easygoing, generous, simple man. Why then should this happen to him? First, he had a wife who neither respected nor cared for him until after the birth of his son. Now this had happened. Yabani saw her approaching and frowned. He had told her repeatedly not to come for him unnecessarily. He wiped his hands on his massive apron and came out and stood by the kitchen door. One look at her told him that something was very wrong. "What is it?" he prompted, looking anxious himself. He frowned deeply as his wife told him what had happened. "Oh, Jesus Christ! This is terrible. Are you quite sure? I'm sorry. You haven't told him yet." Cordelia shook her head negatively. "Then go back, and, as quietly as you can, close the door, and look round for your friend. She probably has not seen the dead child. You say you haven't seen her all morning. Maybe she has seen him. Poor woman. I hope she's not doing something stupid. I don't like it. I don't like it at all." "You mean she may try to harm herself? That may be being overdramatic. Just go. Keep calm, and surreptitiously look about for her without raising any alarm until I have told Naif. God, this is really awful." "Oh, poor woman," she said, hugging herself. Her mind went back to the picture of Nneego having this baby only a month ago. How she had agonized in the kitchen, how painful it had been, being a first child, and how pride had not let her call Naif. Please, Mary, the Mother of God, why did you let this happen to my friend? Go home, Cordelia." Yabani's voice reached her. "Remember, God giveth and God taketh away. We are His, and He treats us the way He feels. You never know. Maybe behind all this there is something smiling for your friend. Cordelia nodded wordlessly, hot tears running down her cheeks. She walked back to their quarters, and was made the more aware of her friend's loss by her 2-year-old calling, "Mother, Mother, I want another bowl of pap." Yabani, a thickly built man with a large head, looked out of the window of his kitchen to see his friend working away and whistling as he rubbed at an overwashed sheet. So engrossed was he in his work that Yabani felt it a sin to disturb him, just as his wife Cordelia had felt earlier. And what a bad disturbance too. But he must be bold, and whatever happened it must be kept a secret. None of them wanted to be involved with the law. The local municipal would want to know how the child died. It was actually illegal then for anyone to die at home. This law had 66 been passed to discourage people taking their sick children to the native medicine men. So when something like this happened, people tended to keep it very quiet. Naif must be told, they must look for Nneego, and she must be forced to realize that in Lagos one was not allowed to show grief openly in such circumstances. They would all be in trouble. Yabani hurried his washing up and left the drying to his young nephew Dillerb, who had been staying with them in Lagos 2 months. He too was now employed by their master Dr. Mears, and the little he earned in the glorified post of small boy everybody's servant helped towards his expenses. His uncle was working hard at seeing the right people who could fix Dillerb up in a proper position with a pension, either at the railways or the docks. This young man could read and write, and with a good dash a kind of approved bribe given to the right people, such a young man would go a long way. But meanwhile, he had to work to save for the dash. Yabani knew that the fatter the dash, the quicker his nephew would make headway, and he was determined to help him. Once Dillerb was well placed, part of his money would flow if not to Yabani then to his children. Make sure the plates and things are dry and shiny before you put them away into their right drawers. "Yes, sir," replied the young man eagerly, pleased and rather surprised at being left in charge of such an important establishment as the big kitchen. The cooking place in the boys' quarters, where they made their native African food, was referred to as the little kitchen. But this was the one from which the master's food was prepared, and it had to be well kept and cleaned. Dillerb realized the depth of his responsibility and was grateful for being entrusted the job. He did not ask why it was important for his uncle to leave his kitchen so early in the morning. Like most youths, he could only think of himself. He was going to use this opportunity to show his uncle that not only was he good enough to take care of the big kitchen, he could do even better, if given the chance, had he not youthfulness on his side as a plus. Yabani guessed what he was thinking from his keenness and smiled sadly. He might have laughed, but for the unsavory task ahead of him. All young people were the same. They never imagined they would get old. Why, not so long ago he had thought that way himself. He had dreamed that he would make so much money from the white men by the time he was that he would be able to go back to his hometown in Emekuku-Awere, where he would live as his grandparents had lived on the farm. In his dream there was no place like this one he found himself in, here where babies badly wanted by their parents died before they had lived at all. Yes, life could at times be so brutal that the only things that made it livable were dreams. He stood for a while watching Naif's concentration. It was not much to ask, really, the chance to work and earn enough to provide for a family, and to be happy doing it, like this man. Still, it could not be helped. He had to be told. Naif was not unaware of Yabani standing there and saying nothing. So he decided to say it for him. "It's going to be a beautiful morning." You know what they say, beautiful mornings seldom make bad days. Naif spoke without raising his face to his friend. He guessed that something was wrong somewhere, but it never occurred to him that it could be in his own family. First, he had seen Celia go up to her husband. Now Yabani was here standing like a statue, unable to utter a word. Well, he was going to continue talking banalities until Yabani was ready to tell him what the matter was. He was not going to hurry him. Protective men like Yabani could feel very touchy about their families. Then suddenly his friend spoke in a rough voice, tremulous and very unlike his. "Can you possibly have a break?" He was looking away too, avoiding Naif. Naif stopped the movement of his hands that had grown agile in years of squeezing and unsqueezing clothes in soapsuds. He looked at Yabani and saw that he was trying to hide something. In fact, it was the first time he had ever seen the Cyberman from the eastern interior looking perplexedly into nothingness. Naif tried to catch his eyes, but they were as elusive as those of a new wife on the first morning in her husband's house. He stood up from his washing. What could be so serious in life as to warrant this lost look? To soften the sharpness of the situation, he said, "I can't come with you right now. I have to hang out these wet sheets, otherwise they will not catch the early sun. And Madam knows when they have not, because the sun bleaches them all white." "Oh, damn the Madam. Sorry, friend, but man cannot live by bread alone." Naif did not miss the urgency in his tone. For the first time, his mind went to his own family, but he soon dismissed the worrying thought. Had he not seen them this morning before starting work? By way of reply he jokingly remarked, "Preaching and living the gospel on a Friday? Or have you become Muslim?" Yabani did not answer. He walked towards the boys' quarters, with Naif following him, still uncertain of what to expect, and beginning to tremble with impatience and suspense. "What is it? Another quarrel between our wives?" Yabani shook his head. The sun was already coming out, drying the damp grass. Birds chirped loudly under the roof of the veranda, circled their nests which hung rather precariously on the branches of the mango trees in the compound. Naif noticed that the nuts of the palm trees bordering their compound were ripe. He must cut the bunches down soon, for the birds were already hovering around them. Yabani's children were sitting at the edge of the raised cemented part of the veranda, digging the balding part of the grass and singing tunelessly to themselves. On a morning like this, when everything looked so natural and normal, Naif could not believe anything could be so wrong, that he would not be able to bear it. His friend must be over-dramatizing the issue. But where was Nneego? He could see no sign of her. He saw Celia standing between the wooden poles that held the veranda roof up, looking at them rather speculatively. "I wonder where my wife is at the moment. Away to sell at the market, perhaps?" It was more a remark to elicit reassurance than a question. Yabani said nothing, just went on briskly towards the house, his head bowed. "You won't mind coming into our room?" Yabani then said. "I don't think your wife is at home. She does not expect you at this time of the morning." "No, I'm not in the habit of coming home at odd times." "I wish you would be kind enough to tell me what all this hide and seek is about." Yabani's room was badly lit, and on such a bright, clear morning the dimness struck one rather forcibly. To worsen the situation, Celia had decided to place their bed by the only window, and as the bed was curtained off, a great deal of daylight was also cut off with it. She was sitting huddled behind the curtain, hugging her bended knees, as if in acute pain. "You haven't been beating her so early in the morning?" the mother of your children?" Naif asked. He was the more disturbed when Celia, unable to hold herself any longer, started to whimper, trying hard at the same time to control her feelings. Yabani shook his head sadly. Then he told him that the son he was so proud of was there lying on their mat, stone dead. Yabani said many things by way of comfort. He advised his friend to trust in God. He quoted instances where worse things had happened, and finally begged his friend to wake up, to make a move. Naif sat there glued to the straight-backed chair, looking in front of him, and yet seeing nothing in particular. It was incredible, unbelievable, what Yabani was saying. It had little to do with him, or had it? Yabani said to his wife, "Bring me a half glass of that ogogoro for him." Celia moved, and then Naif felt a small glass of native gin being pushed into his dead-like hands. He was forced to drink the hot stuff in one quick gulp. His hands started to shake, and Yabani took the glass from him. "Look, Naif my friend, if you behave like this, what of your wife?" A kind of life seemed to be forced into him with that statement. "Yes, where is my wife, and where is Ngozi?" he asked eventually, waking up from his dream and wanting to know which part of it was actually real. "Ngozi. His body is lying there in your room. Let us go in." "But his mother, we don't know where she is." "I decided to break the sad news to you first, so we could then plan the best thing to do," Yabani said apologetically. Naif led the way into the room and saw the dead child. He knew then that he had not been dreaming. He moved and spoke mechanically. "I wonder if Nneego knew about the child," he mumbled, staring hypnotically at the dead infant, as if by not taking his eyes off his son the stiff limbs would start to quiver with life as he had seen them do only a few hours before when he was being given his early feed. Naif answered his own question. "I think she must have seen the child, and in her sorrow has run away from me. If that is the case, we must search for her now. Few women are rational when hit by such a shock. She may overreact, and God knows what she will do," said Yabani, looking grim. "Oh, my God. Poor woman. She endures me, only because of this child, you know. She thinks I'm ugly. She hates me. She has always hated me." "Nonsense, my friend," Yabani tried to console him. "How can a woman hate a husband chosen for her by her people? You are to give her children and food. She is to cook, and bear the children and look after you and them. So what is there to hate? A woman may be ugly and grow old, but a man is never ugly and never old. He matures with age and is dignified." His own wife Celia had begun to weep in sympathy with her bereaved friend. "Please accept my condolences, Naif," Yabani went on, "and you must stop talking like a woman. Not everyone is lucky with their first child, and I'm sorry. But now you have to make Nneego pregnant again very soon," he urged. "You'll see, this will soon be something of the past.